live with Tony, the founder of Stately News. Tony, thanks for your time. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So, actually, the way I came across you was a fan recommendation. I got started on Instagram. I post a reel a day on Instagram and a short a day on YouTube. And one of the comments was on Rip Views. Actually, I don't know if you've heard of Rip Views. They what they do there is they find the biggest bias on both sides, and they'll post it. And one of your fans commented like, "Oh, I love the info, love the idea. You should check out Stately News, and you should have them on." And I checked you out and loved what I saw, and here we are. So,
Yeah.
if you want to tell your story, how you came to found Stately News, the mission of it, what is the story there of Stately News?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first, it was pretty cool to see that because I'm actually familiar. I think their name was Nathan. They had actually just started following us a few days before that after I did a reel that kind of blew up. And so I thought that was super cool that, they sort of fell in love with what we were doing and, to the point to where they were willing to promote us to you guys. So I thought that's super cool. And I also love what Rip Views is doing. I think that's really important to be showing, the bias on both sides and to sort of present that to a larger audience is really important. And it kind of ties into what we sought to do here at Stately News. Originally we started off as Common Ground News, and we sort of rebranded a few months ago. And it came from this point to where we're looking at this polarization that's going on in society, and you sort of how you have folks that are sort of in their own echo chambers these days, to where the social media that they consume, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, things like that, to where they're only exposed to a set of ideas and values that confirms what they already believe or want to believe. And we've created this environment where no one's willing to talk about politics with one another. You have families that get broken up. I've experienced this in my own family, and I'm sure you and people watching have as well. And I think it's unfortunate because the American experiment, in my view, really relies on us being able to talk about tough ideas. Willing to agree to disagree on some points, of course, but you've got to talk about things. And that's sort of that spirit is what led me to start something like Stately News, to where we can just offer just neutral, objective, old school journalism. So you can have a place that you can go and get the basic set of facts on a recent story or a bill that got passed. And then you can use that to build your worldview. And you can then discuss and engage in politics with a solid set of, quality, nonpartisan information. So
Yeah, there's two things I don't want to touch on there. Not to cut you off, but there's two things I really want to touch on there, because I agree that the American experiment, which has been probably, in my mind, undebatably, but debatably like the greatest experiment the world has ever put together, it really does rely on discussion. It relies on two sides that disagree being able to come and talk to each other, because when the talks break down, that's when you can look at the other side as a monster, and you
right.
can, whatever your echo chamber is going to tell you is what you're going to believe. And that's one of the really cool parts and important parts of Twitter. That it's kind of what sparked, what turned this into the good of Twitter. Was I originally was a kind of an investing podcast, and I started a vending machine company, and I downloaded Twitter because I started getting into stocks, and there were a lot of people teaching a lot of good education on Twitter. And I just kind of discovered like, oh wow, this is a crazy cool place, and it's the marketplace for ideas, and it's the town square, and like it's so important that this does work and this does go well, and somehow it's like Twitter needs to stay around. And I wanted to spread that message of like, hey, look how all these great people doing great things using this social media, and like honestly that dialogue is probably the biggest part of it. So I love that what you're doing. To transition to my second thing I wanted to touch on is presenting the facts. And journalism, unfortunately, it's something that's changed. And it, ironically for me, my friends that are like the biggest supporters of how journalism looks today are journalists, and they were just like, you just don't understand the process and XYZ. And in my mind, when I talk to them, I'm like, hey, you should be the ones that say, you should be the loudest proponents of, hey, we need to change the system back. Something broke here, where it went from, we're going to do what Stately News is doing. We're going to present you with the facts. We're going to go do the information. And even people putting themselves in dangerous situations and being heroes to, hey, we're going to tell you what to think, which is what Rip Views has shown very well, is that, hey, this is what the right side's telling you what to think about this moment. This is what the left side telling you to think about this moment.
Right.
And it's a really people like at reviews and the people at like Stately News, it's super important. Like what you're doing is we just need a ton of individual contributors like yourself that are willing to do this, and hopefully over time, over the next decade or so, we can see this re-transformation back into what journalism was.
Exactly, and that's what I think it's going to take. The market has to realize that there is a demand and a desire for that again. And really, realistically, in a perfect world, like stately news, we shouldn't have to sort of market ourselves as neutral, nonpartisan news. We should just be like, we're giving you the news. That's how it should be. But
Yeah.
because we've sort of gone off in this completely different, sensationalized, commercialized path, like that's like now that's like a new marketable sort of approach to take, because the status quo has become partisan and just sort of like reality TV, to be honest with you. And
Yeah,
it's
no, it is.
and I think like Joseph Schumpeter is like an old school like economist. He coined the term creative destruction, how like innovation and new creations and things like that come along and change industries, and sort of the old guard dies off. And I think that's what we saw with the previous, and I guess you could argue the current, framework of news that we're seeing right now. And they're starting to realize that things aren't going well, like CNN, Fox News. The ratings are down, and you're starting to see the rise of independent journalists and other news corporations like Breaking News or Breaking Points. I don't know if you're familiar with them, like Sauger and
Crystal,
Crystal.
and yeah.
I love what they're all about and love what they're doing. They've gone on independent. They were previously with The Hill, and now they're doing their own thing and they're killing it. I think their YouTube channel just hit 1 million subscribers, so they're doing well.
Incredible.
Reviews, stately news, just like you said, we need a lot more of that, and I think we're starting to see a demand there, that people just want a place to where they can go and see what was going on, who was involved, and that's it. They don't need you to tell them what to think. Like, people are really sick of that. So yeah, I
Absolutely.
think it's an interesting time, and I think stuff like you're doing with the good of Twitter, and just I don't know. I'm optimistic about the future and where we're headed, but there's a lot of work to be done, and so that's
I am too. Yeah, no, there is work to be done. There's a author, George Friedman, who I like a lot. He's one of those geopolitical predictors and studies of history.
yeah,
And he wrote a book called The Next 100 Years, published 2009, and so far it's pretty spot on.
yeah,
And he wrote another book called The Storm Before the Calm, which is specifically about America. And he started writing it before Trump was elected, finished
right,
writing it after Trump was elected. And he talked a lot about a new guard coming in politically after this election. So actually, if we get Trump again or Biden again, it would line up pretty well with what he was predicting. And then that's when you're going to see kind of a culmination of the different projects that you and I and people like Andrew Yang, who started the Forward Party, who I'm a big fan of the Forward Party and what they're about and their message. And if you want to dive deeper into it at some point in this conversation, I'm really about the ranked choice voting and the open primaries and things that will force the incentives to drive towards the middle. And all of these things are going to come together in a culmination, in George Freeman's opinion, and will start to show its head really and start to take the lead in that 2028 cycle, the
yeah,
2032 cycle. And I am an optimist. I do have to say that. But in my mind, when I read people like him, when I keep my finger on the pulse of society, it does seem that way. It seems that there is a giant portion, if not the majority, of Americans and people kind of around the world that waking up to what's happening. And like, hey, stop telling me, like you said, stop telling me what to think. I
yeah,
just want the news, and I want these incentives to stop driving us apart, start driving us towards the middle, and start driving towards the discussion. So I'm with you. I'm right there with you. Is the whole point that I am an optimist, but I think that when I look around, I see all these great things happening, and so many more people starting projects like this. And I just think, I think 2030s are going to be a more fun time than the last few years and the next few years, which is probably still going to be a bit of a storm.
yeah. No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And for example, like I know a lot of people have been critical of him lately, but I think what Elon Musk did by stepping in and sort of taking over Twitter, I was super excited about it, because while I do news and things like that, and I'm also into like the app development space and stuff like that's what I do as my
Mm.
job, my first main job. But a lot of my free time I spend studying history, philosophy, legislative affairs, how to write actual bills. That's the stuff that gets me excited. But I think one of the core, like, foundational issues we were facing was like the First Amendment issues that were going on with Twitter with the previous ownership, and where people were worried about being censored, and they felt one side of the aisle basically didn't have an equal say as the other did, and like with the moderation tactics and things like that. And I think there was a lot of merit to what they were saying, and obviously with the Twitter files that got released, we gained some more clarity in regard to that, and it did look like there was some sketchy stuff going on. So I think having him coming out and sort of balancing things out is very important. I think that will help restore people's trust in things like Twitter, where that's predominantly where our free speech is taking place these days. It's not like back when our founders were running this, where we were at like halls and pubs and things like that, discussing things. Now it happens
Yeah, absolutely.
predominantly online, podcasts, Twitter threads, the comment section, and so on. And so it's important that we all have a place to where we can battle these ideas out and let the best ideas win. So I thought that was great. And I think it also points to where we're heading. And I think, what you're doing here, Rip Views, Stately News, Lex Friedman, like these, I don't know. I just think the middle, sort of the commonsensical, even though common sense is sort of a relative term, but I just think there's a more moderate, just sort of new approach that's coming, and it's on the horizon. It's hopefully going to sort of fight back against these partisan extreme sides that have been sort of dominating the political process. And so hopefully we'll
Absolutely.
see, balance out over time. But I think a lot of it, we just need to do our politics in a better way. And for me,
Yes.
in order to do that, you also need your news and communications to be done the right way as well. So it's all like a perpetual sort of cycle that each facet of the process relies on one another to do its job the right way. And the only way to do that is
Yes.
get to work and get your hands dirty and get involved. And so here we are.
Amazing. So, yes, on that note, I want to hear more about Tony and Stately News. So, you saw this all happening. You wanted to get involved. What is your story? Were you growing up? Did you want to get into journalism? Is your 9 to 5, or was that in journalism? Is that in journalism? What's the story of Tony here?
That's a good one. So I love a good origin story. So I've actually always been in sort of journalism programs since middle school, really, but I never thought it would be something I actually pursued professionally. When I was finishing up college, and then after, I was doing political campaigns. When I had my first paid campaign here in Miami, working on Mayor Suarez's campaign, and we got to work on every aspect of that campaign. It was super cool. But I realized that with political campaigns, you only get the people elected. You don't get to do anything to sort of fix the issues that's affecting the communities that you're talking to on a daily basis. And so that's when I got interested in legislative affairs and bills, politics, Congress, Senate, all that stuff. But where things currently are, where I'm sort of making like fitness apps and stuff with influencers, because my wife, she's a notable like personal trainer. She has a following. And so I sort of developed these skills of doing apps and websites and things like that. And I sort of had a background with education and journalism, public relations, politics. And so I wanted to find a way that I could help contributing to society on an issue I think is important, like journalism and polarization. And I sort of combined everything I've learned over the years through education, just life experience, work, internships, all that. And that's what Stately News became. I do the website all my own. I run all of our social media stuff right now. Content. I developed our own app and got up on the app stores. And yeah, we launched back in October, so we're only about 6 months in, and we're off to a great start. We got about 2,000 followers across all of our accounts, which is small, but you got to start somewhere. But we're averaging like 5,000 individual readers a month, and I'm pretty excited about that. So
Wow.
yeah,
That's awesome. I didn't know you had an app, so I'll definitely download the app.
and we
One of
actually
my
we have a both sides tab, which is similar to what Ripviews does. And on that both sides tabs, it'll show you like key quotes from like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to Mitch McConnell, and you'll get to see what they think about like key issues, like the trans issue with like trans athletes and girls sports right now.
Mhm.
You get to see both aspects, so it opens up people's perspectives to what both sides are actually saying, rather than being stuck in their echo chamber to where they think, oh, that side's just racist and oh, that side's just Marxist, or whatever
Yeah.
the terms
whatever it
easier.
may be for that topic. Yeah.
Because we're seeing a lot
No,
of
it's
that
a
these days where one side is just dismissing the other side and attacking their character and who they are rather than the ideas and presenting a better set of ideas. And that's what we need more of. So,
definitely, definitely. And that's it's funny, like with the conversations I have a lot with my friends, whoever it may be, the echo chamber has been coming up a lot these days. I love talking politics, like different political issues. I think it's how you grow your morality. I think it's how you grow your ability to think. Because if you're gonna really sit there and debate, you're gonna have to actually put thought into it and put it in your own head, debate both sides of it, and you're gonna say things. I learned this at 15. One of my very smart friends that to this day I'm good friends with him, and I said something. I brought out some stats, some statistic.
right.
And I think it was a sports debate.
Yeah.
And he started looking it up. And I was like, oh no. And it was like the first moment in my life where I was like, oh, dude, like I just said that. And he's going to know in about 15 seconds, I just said that. And
Right.
it was like, it was one of those moments I just never forgot. And it's because of that debate. And sports is another thing that I do want to start talking to some sports journalists here, and I actually got a couple lined up down the line. And it's one of those things. It's debate, and I think like this just debate is really good. And then you bring in the politics of it, and all of a sudden there's morality, and obviously morality is extremely important for society to talk about. And one of the things that keeps getting brought up lately are these echo chambers. And you mentioned that families that can get, torn apart because of politics or just like won't talk about it. One of my good buddies, he says he just doesn't even talk to his sister. Like she has no idea who he is politically. He said he just agrees with her because it's just like it's not even worth it because her echo chamber is so it's this in this particular case it's very left, it's very progressive.
Right.
And it's wild to me because I lived in a don't get me wrong, we were growing up, there's a lot of yelling, but I did live in a house where it was encouraged, and we talked about these things. My dad, I would say, he encouraged the talks, and we're pretty all over the board. I have three older brothers. One of them's very libertarian,
Right.
and one's very socialist. And I'm I would say I'm probably maybe a smidge to the left, but pretty damn center, which is one of the things that I figured out myself that I do like that, and I like
Like
talking to both
classic,
sides, and I
you're probably like a classic liberal, like in the old school
yeah,
traditional
old school
sense.
liberal. I'd almost say a Bill Maher liberal. I align with him a lot, and it's funny though. That's not a liberal anymore. I mean, it's funny. I think it's it's,
It's
it's an insult, but the one thing that people on the left don't like being called, they don't like being called Democrats or liberals. And in my mind, when I'm talking to friends on the left, it's kind of giving them shit. I'm just like, you don't. Those are the two things you don't deserve to be called. Those are good things. Those are good words right there. A liberal is someone that's open minded, that doesn't think they're better than anybody based off their thoughts or anything like that. And you're not that.
right.
You're a progressive. You're John McWhorter wrote a book called Woke Racism. He calls them the elect. I call them wokes. And like they're not that. They're not liberal. I don't think they deserve that word. It. I think the center is pretty liberal or libertine. And I think that's a great thing. So those, I mean, that did stand for debate. That stand for people that wanted to have the debates and wanted to talk. And even these days, conservatives, people that identify as conservative, it's not really conservative. If you look at the Daily Wire, for example, which were people that I despised when I was young. And then as I got older and older, I was starting to gain more and more respect for their viewpoint. And all of a sudden, this transgender thing comes up, and it's just gotten very dark and not conservative at all. Conservatives want small government. They want the government out of your business. That's the main key thing to being conservative. And all of
Right.
a sudden, it's people on the Daily Wire wanting transgenderism eradicated from public life. Not transgender people eradicated, as some people would say, but eradicated from public life. And that's whoa, that's not conservative. That's not a conservative take. And it's weird to see for me when I'm having these conversations, it's weird to see that like, hey, this isn't progressive, this isn't liberal, and on the other side, this isn't conservative at all. That's not conservative. And this is how you identify. You should really understand what that means to identify that way, and you should try and challenge yourself to say, just think, hey, what are my thoughts on this? Is this aligning with what I think, with my ideology? And if it's not, why do I think this? Why do I feel this way? And question yourself. And it's amazed how much you can change and how much more level-headed you become in conversations. I've had conversations where I'm like this, and I'm just smiling and just
Right.
talking, and the other side's just they're getting pretty mad because they can't stump me. They want to win the debate, and in
Right.
my mind, it's not about winning; it's about getting to the right answer. And you and I aren't going to have the right answer. We're going to have to get to it, and that's what the discussion's about. So it is really funny how all of that has happened and it feels like the last 10 years. Like it feels like it's happened very recently. Like when I was a kid, it was
It's
it was
changed.
different.
Yeah, it's changed quickly, rapidly, and I think that's due in part to the internet and social media. Things, they change quicker and they're more amplified. When you really study history, I've looked at like recent, like not recent, but previous elections, like presidential elections and stuff like that, and I see a lot of similarities to what we've seen happen over the last 5, 6, 7 years. We think it's really different, but it's not. It's just a different flavor. And with social media, like everything is constantly in our face, so we think that it's so
Mm,
much worse, but really we're no different than how we used to be. And I think, like, for example, with like the transgender issue and how conservatives have, like you've mentioned, they've gone on this like overtly sort of like on the offense kind of thing, like get rid of these people out of society. And that's sort of like contradicts what traditional conservatism was all about. And then, of course, the left today trying to refer to themselves as liberal, even though their sort of like progressive counterparts are really not liberal at all. And I think there's something to be said about that, to where like the modern versions of these words are not even what, like the exercise and execution of them is not
yeah.
what the word used to mean. And so I think that we're at a sort of a fork in the road where we have to decide, like, are we going to let factions continue to direct our country, or is the majority of Americans that are in the middle with better things to do than to worry about the 24-hour news cycle? Are
Yeah.
they going to step in and finally take the country back and say, hey, all these special interests and sort of extremists and hyper partisans, like we can't have that anymore? Of course they're going to have a say in the political process no matter what, but we have to sort of create an environment that encourages all sides to have a seat at the table, basically. And I want to dive deeper into this because there's a lot of good stuff that we can talk about with these things, but I just want to preface that everything that we do at Stately News is still independent from me and my own thoughts and beliefs. Of course I have opinions just like everyone else, some strong and some that I continue to develop. But at Stately News, I still think it's important as a journalist first that I can set that aside to where I write a story. I'm just giving you the neutral set of facts. Of course, everyone has their own bias, thoughts, and beliefs, and it's impossible to completely get away from that. So I just want to preface that because obviously, like you saw with Joe with Rip Views, like he's more hesitant to get into the more political stuff because he doesn't want to. It's difficult when you're trying to be the neutral in the middle guy. You don't want to
No,
ruin people's
absolutely.
image. And with me, I'm very much the same way, but I'm a little more willing to talk about certain things. And so for like a
And if
change,
there's anything, oh,
yeah,
sorry,
go.
yeah, I was just say if there's anything that you want to just say, let's not talk about that. I'm happy to skip over it, but
No,
I do hold a lot of strong opinions, and it's kind of funny. I've questioned like my role as now. Today actually was a day where the Instagram algorithm finally picked me up. Posted like every day for 40 days straight, and
nice.
today it's just like things started to get likes, and there were different ones getting likes, and I was like, okay, something clicked here. Like an algorithm found this, and as I've started to gain a follower a day, whatever it is, I really have thought like, okay, well, I am the good of Twitter. I should probably uphold the good of Twitter, and it's like, what is that? And I started to question it more deeply,
Right.
and it's one of those things where like I do think about it. I don't have an answer yet, or maybe I never will. Maybe it's one of those things where I will just continue to develop what that means. But I've thought about that and just like, is maybe before I hit send on a tweet, think about that. And it hasn't come up yet, anything of that nature of, oh, maybe this isn't good, because I do think having opinions and sharing those opinions with the world are good, even if they're, in my opinion, vile. Even if there's I'm Jewish. I'm very proudly Jewish. This might be something we talk about, is Israel at some point. Even if there's anti-Zionist or
Yeah.
Nazis, which kind of have the same goal, and I think those opinions are very vile, I want you to share that if that's your opinion. I want to talk about it. I'd actually would love to have like someone that identifies as a Nazi on here, and just like, I think that's a good part of Twitter. It's like, hey,
That
let
would
me
be,
talk to you. Like, let
be
me
wild.
introduce you to who I am, and
Right.
then I want to know who you are too. And like, why do you think the way you think? And in my opinion, that is the good of Twitter. But it is one of those things that I do think about now. So as someone who wants to be an independent journalist, and from what I've seen, you're doing a really good job of it. It's one of my news sources now, which is really cool. Rip Views is now one of my, it's like my main news source,
That's
and Stately News is quickly becoming one of those too. And we need so many little ones like that, because once you get bigger and bigger and bigger, and other special interests get involved, it makes sense how CNN and Fox News and all of these news sources are what they are. I
yeah,
think the real answer is the individuals contributing individually, small business, and we just need a ton of good small businesses,
yeah.
especially in journalism. We just need good journalists, and it's a hard job. So the whole point of that rant being, I understand if something like, hey, I want to stay neutral here. It was something that I kept forcing Joe to, not even on purpose. It was kind of when I was reviewing the tape. I was like, man, he didn't want to talk about any of this stuff. Like, you should have just moved on. And so if
Well, I
that's
can
something you
understand.
want to do here,
Yeah, no. Well, I wanted to preface that just real quick, just in case people that follow us at Stately and they come and watch this podcast and they see me
yeah,
speaking. I don't want them to be disappointed. I want to just preface that first, but I'm actually willing to talk about stuff in detail if you want, and I can talk about my own
I'd
beliefs
love
because,
to.
like I said, I believe in the marketplace of ideas. And if someone has been following Stately this whole time and they've just sort of thought that I, of course, am completely have no opinion of anything, well, then they've just been misled. I mean, we have to be realistic. I'm a human like anyone else. With that said, I just wanted to make it known that no matter what I think and believe, that's not going to be what Stately is ever directed by. And I always want it to be a place that's seen for just doing news the right way, and it always will be, regardless of what I believe. And I've worked on many
What
stories.
is
Yeah, go ahead.
what is the mission of Stately News? The mission and the vision specifically. What are those for Stately News?
To be a respected, just online news outlet that you can get coverage on U.S. politics, economics, business, international affairs. That's basically, I would like us to turn into just a quality app and website that you can go and get quick, articles that you can read in like 5 minutes or less that breaks down, the hot topics and stories of the day. And that that when you're reading it, you're not getting, preached to or some agenda pushed down your throat, some partisan agenda. I mean, because technically, I guess you could argue our agenda is sort of just pro fact, pro neutrality. But yeah, just a basic, you know, news source. It does news the right way. And ultimately, I hope that becomes just the industry standard. So
I was gonna
just
say, it's crazy
hoping
how
to
rare
push it.
that is.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
It
it's
shouldn't be.
wild.
Right. Because when you learn about, journalism in the very beginning, when you're learning like basic reporting and just journalistic writing and doing interviews, and you're taught to be objective. But of course, you have all these companies competing for clicks, and they have these certain groups of people that read and believe certain things, and so they have to create content that gets those people interested in their stuff. And so, but I think if you can create a base of customers and readers that are interested in just getting real news, then you can create a demand for that. But there won't be a demand until people know it actually exists. So we need more of it, and it exists.
Mm.
There's like News Nation. I think they're on like some TV platforms to where you can watch them and stream their stuff, and they claim to be neutral. I haven't actually checked them out, but from what I've heard, they do a pretty decent job. And I guess there's a new startup called The Messenger that's coming out, and they're going to be trying to do that as well. They've actually been buying up like smaller media startups in the process. So I mean, we'll see. But like I said, I'm optimistic that we'll get there. Yeah,
I'm
time will
I'm
tell.
also optimistic. I mean, talking to people like you, it makes me very optimistic. And people that are actually in the arena, is that Jefferson quote, or is that Roosevelt quote?
Roosevelt, yeah, Teddy
Uh,
Roosevelt.
the man in
Yeah.
the arena, which actually Elon Musk is definitely a great example of the man in the arena. I don't know how Twitter. I mean, from a pure business standpoint, that company was crashing. It was going under. It was a horrible business,
Oh
and
yeah.
now it's doing well. I don't think it's cash positive. They're private, so we're not going to be able to see the financial statements. But
And plus the timing. I
they're
mean, with the economy, it's going to be sort of tough. Like, but he had to shed the fat. I mean,
yeah,
far too many
yeah,
workers. They weren't getting enough production. Like he clearly, they're going to go through some growing pains. But I think ultimately he's going to come out on the right side of it for sure.
yeah. And he is, in my mind, it is objective. Not to say the man is perfect or anything like that, but it's done with a good heart. It's done with a good intention, and it's something that, in my opinion, the good of Twitter. Like, we need Twitter. It needed to be done. Someone needed to do it, and this wasn't a make money thing. This was you could argue if you wanted to argue from a point of view. I guess if you don't like Elon Musk, oh, he just wanted power, and I could see an argument for, yeah, it's a power grab. You now control the town square of the world. It's a way to keep yourself relevant if you want that. If you want to argue those points, I could see the arguments lining up. But at the end of the day, it definitely wasn't for money. And in my opinion, it was pretty altruistic to take this risk on behalf of, the world and hopefully keep Twitter alive. We'll see what happens, but he's definitely the man in the arena. And to backtrack real quick,
Yeah.
because he brought up Elon Musk, one of the things you said is, to paraphrase, these words of conservative, liberal, they're not the same meaning as they used to be. That's actually one of the biggest issues. I don't get to talk about this a lot, so I'm glad that this got brought up. It's
Yeah.
one, in my opinion, maybe the single biggest issue we have in our dialogue is that the words that we use don't mean the same thing to you and me. And that causes such a big conflict. So the one that I use to describe this to everybody, although this, I'll get to another one that I think hurts my heart the most.
Yeah.
But the one that I use to describe it to everybody is the word feminist. Feminist is one that everyone can wrap their mind around, because a feminist is someone that believes in equal rights, equal opportunity between men and women. And
Right.
by that definition, what, 98% of us are feminist? And now when you hear feminist, depending on who you are, but I'd say especially from a conservative point of view, I hate to put all conservatives in one bucket, but this is the one that pops in my head when I talk about it, like Daily Wire people or people of that ilk. When they're talking about feminists, that's not what they mean at all when they say that word.
Right.
They're talking about radicals and people that want a matriarchy instead of a patriarchy, and it there's just not a good common definition being talked about when those conversations are happening. And you
Right.
can see that with so many words, with so many different dialogues, political dialogues that are happening. And I'm curious, like, how do we solve that? Is it simply just bringing together everybody first and then, like, hey, while we're having this conversation, let's pause. This is what I mean when I say this word. What do you mean? Because I don't know another way that we can get around that. And it's one of the things that the big companies, big media outlets use to their advantage.
I was
It
just going to mention
Yeah.
that. For example, I mean, just think, because you took the conservative example. Just imagine these conservative folks, and just to be completely honest, I'm definitely a moderate in a lot of ways, but I do kind of lean right. But I've always had, in modern times, a difficulty considering myself a conservative, because in the general sense, usually they're conserving or sort of preserving sort of the old norms against sort of changes that
Yes.
are happening. They're trying to slow it down and moderate the pace at which it changes. But for me, I think you should be ready to make necessary changes immediately if need be. For example, and that's why I like the old school Republicans speak more to my nature and what I believe is important, like President Eisenhower, Teddy Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses Grant. Like, the Republican Party was founded to combat slavery. He literally had to weaponize the federal government to fight against half of the country. Traditionally speaking, a conservative would never have done that. And even back then, the Republican Party wasn't technically conservative. Conservatism, as we know today, sort of developed later on, and that's a whole interesting, discussion in and of itself. But yeah, so I just think it's really interesting. And so with the conservatives that we're talking about now, when they think of that term leftist, when they're watching Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, whoever else, when they see a feminist on that YouTube screen, it's usually a pink-haired, super progressive extremist, maybe in some cases, screaming, holding a sign, whatever. Just the typical sort of imagery that these outlets will use to show to their audience what the other side is like. And on the other side, you'll have the Young Turks, for example, maybe showing, their audience a conservative that's like holding an AR with their kids or something in front of a Christmas tree, and they're painting these caricatures, excuse me, of each side to their own audience, to their own echo chamber. And since these people never engage or discuss with people that differ from their worldview, they truly think that that's what that other word means. And those people that use those words, that's who they are. They don't think of the nuance. And to me, life is nuance and nuance is life. Like everything, there's a lot
Yeah.
more to every single thing than just one or the other word, or black or white, red or blue. Like there's never just one or two ways to, approach a problem or a discussion. And we have these sort of just factions, the left and right, that have sort of hijacked the political process, and they've got us with these blinders on, thinking on there's no alternatives, but there are. And I think that only starts when we start having discussions like this, and opening up people's perspectives to new ideas.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
And
Are
so,
there?
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go, please. No, please. After
I was
you.
just gonna say, so like that's why I have a difficult time considering myself a conservative. Like the best way for me to explain where I stand is to mention like historical figures that people can think, oh, I kind of know what he was about, and talk about specific, just like policies and ideas that I support. Like it's just because of the issue with what words mean to everyone, it's difficult to sort of pin yourself down. And so I've always had a difficulty latching onto those words and using them, just like you discussed, because it's so difficult. It means something different to every single person. So
Exactly. If I had to pin myself down to something at this point in time, a political party, I would say I am a forwardist, which is Andrew Yang's party.
right,
And there's nothing I want. The time I want to be on TV the most is when I hear Andrew Yang talk. So I like Bill Maher. I'll watch like clips of him on YouTube, and when he has Andrew Yang on, or Andrew Yang goes and talks to somebody, it makes me want to go on TV and be a spokesman so bad. Because, for example, Bill Maher says, "Well, like, you don't. The Forward Party doesn't stand for anything. There's no stance. Like you used to be UBI, and whatever you thought about that, it was a stance. It was a topic. It was something that you guys stood for."
right,
And he just kind of sits there and takes it. And it's like, dude, I can't believe I'm saying this, but you need more Trump in you. Like, God, for God's sakes, have some more Trump in you and stand up for yourself. Because if I was
I have
in those shoes, yeah, if I was in those shoes, I'd be like, hey, that's not true. You're just wrong. What we stand for are open primaries. So you don't ever have to vote between Trump and Biden or Trump and Clinton, which nobody wanted.
right,
And what we stand for are ranked choice voting. So it's going to force you to go towards the middle versus going to be right now. The incentive is to, I'm going to go. I mean, look at Trump's base, and I have no evidence for this. I don't know the guy, but I don't believe Trump believes the things he says. He's pandering to a base. And I know Biden doesn't believe the things he says because he said different things 20 years ago. He said completely different things 20 years ago as a politician. So
whichever.
obviously the pandering to the bases. Yeah. So ranked choice voting is going to make you pander to the middle. Obviously, politicians are going to pander. Not going to change that. But
Right,
if you can change the incentive system to, hey, you can't just go get 40% of the vote because they're only going to get 30% of the vote of people that like them. Now it's, well, if that extra 30% that didn't want to vote for either of you, or call it 45, 40%, and then there's that 15% left. Well, if that extra 15% hates you more than they hate the other guy with ranked choice voting, well, then that means they're going to rank them second. So when their first vote loses,
right,
all of those votes now go to the other guy. All of a sudden, we have an incentive system in this country that forces you towards the middle.
right,
And it's very, Joe did a great job, Rip Views did a great job of kind of blowing my mind of, oh, wow, no, common sense is different to everybody. But in my mind, that is extremely common sense. And that should cross the party lines of what common sense is. I'm sure if I had discussions with people that disagreed, they would bring up some point that maybe actually that I can't think of, but I can't think of a point of, no, we shouldn't do that. Like that is something that worked in Alaska, and it's something that appears to work very, very well. And we all agree the system's broken, no matter what side you're on. So yeah, I get up in arms when I see him talk. 'Cause I'm like, you're just not good at this. You're not good at this part of it. You're a genius, and I I agree with a lot of, not everything, but I agree with a lot of what Yang does. But definitely a little spineless and just not ferocious enough. He doesn't have that. I don't even know what the word might be. A Trump, for lack of a better word, there's no Trump in him.
right.
So I
And
wish he could do better about that.
I think that's fair. And I saw on the episode with Joe when you guys talked about the Forward Party and Yang, and I was thinking the same thing to myself. And I've said this since he launched Forward Party. I love what they're about. I think a strong third party competitor is very much needed, but he is not going to be the guy that leads the party. Maybe he starts it and sort of gets the movement going, but he's obviously not going to be the one because he just has no political capital to use. He hasn't won any major races, unfortunately. And that's not to say he isn't brilliant and accomplished, because he is. And I certainly don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but he makes a lot of great points. And I think generally what he's fighting for is worth fighting for. So I love, what they're about, what they're doing. When it comes to the ranked choice voting and things like that, I'm sure someone could probably bring up a point that makes me think differently. But generally, I think it's a good idea, and I think it would help. Opening up options more and sort of fighting back against this two-party system that's sort of had the hold on the political process here. But the thing is I just can't imagine them not doing everything in their power to make sure something like that never challenges the status quo. And that's the issue. With me, here's an interesting idea I've always had. I think it would sort of take a renegade, sort of a charismatic leader on one of the sides, but would probably be a moderate candidate to win office, maybe a governorship, maybe the presidency if possible. And then as soon as they win, relinquish sort of their partisan allegiance and say, hey, I'm now an independent. I'm going to work with both sides. I think that would be amazing, because it would force both sides to sort of, I don't know, woo sort of the interest in favor of whoever that candidate is now, to work with them to pass bills to support their agenda. It would really get them on their toes. But at the same time, I would worry that both the left and right would then conspire together just to impeach whoever that is and to get them out of power immediately. So, but who knows? But I think a third party, it's going to be an uphill battle. It's going to take time, but I think it's important. But, maybe Ford is the beginning of that.
I hope so. And we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I am curious, you have a more of a political background than most people I've ever talked to. So how would, let's say there's somebody that comes out of the blue. If I don't know who, obviously we don't know who this person would be, but Andrew Yang does a good job developing this. All of a sudden you have that person. You have somebody, I'm trying to think of like a relevant name that might be a good example. A young Joe Manchin or someone like that, who they see this forward party. Also, let's just use the forward party for now as that third party. They see the forward party, they see it growing, they see the success, and okay, I think I can be this guy or this girl that can go take this to the next level and get this on the podium for the presidential speech, for the presidential debates. How does that go about? How do you think that person makes that rise? Do you only see that through governorship, or is there another path for?
Yeah, they could definitely dominate in like local, nonpartisan races. Like a lot of mayoral campaigns are nonpartisan, so they're not. They're affiliated to a certain party, but when they're running, they're not affiliated with a party. I know in Miami it's that way. I'm not sure if it's like that in every municipality, but it may be. And so I think Ford, that might be a strategic advantage if they started focusing on the smaller races and took advantage of that, and sort of have some, I think younger is probably the better way to go. Younger, charismatic people that win some races and do some effective things once they win. And I think that could sort of change the tide in their favor. I think that would be an interesting advantage, like a proof of concept. Like, hey, look what we've accomplished. Look what it looked like. Look what we did. Yeah. Now let's bring that to the national stage and do it on mass scale. I think that would be a good way to go about it, because like I've said, he hasn't won any major races yet. And I think he's at a point to where it might be better if he's sort of handling the macro operations and setting up other people to succeed rather than being the face of it. Because like you said, he's not enough of a competitor to go on the offense like that when he's on like a Bill Maher or somewhere else, to really stand up for the ideals and to sort of shape an agenda that people can latch onto. Because that's the thing about ideas. Like ideas, they use us humans like chess pieces to sort of execute their realization in the world. So in order for an idea or a concept to come to life, we have to bring it into reality. And we need someone that's going to be able to do that. And I don't know if he's going to be able to do that as a candidate. So yeah, time will tell.
Time will tell. Time will tell. I don't think he's going to be that guy either, unfortunately so. But if Tony was president, now I'm very curious about your personal politic, since you want to talk about it. What were some issues that you would want to, a couple of issues, maybe one big issue that you think about a lot that you'd want to tackle?
Well, funny enough, the first thing was Twitter. I thought that was a huge issue. And I thought there was a number of ways where the president could sort of set things up to ensure sort of national neutrality, which I think is important. So like you see a lot of like companies now coming out and making political statements and running ads and stuff like that. I think that while it's good that they have a voice and they have every right to, constitutionally speaking right now, I think it does a lot of harm when I just think it creates division. I think our major institutions, like our governments, people working within our governments, and like these major corporations, especially considering that they're so intermingled nowadays, I think they should be neutral and stay out of politics. I think that should be where the people and public servants battle these ideas out. And I think we risk falling into this scenario that we're sort of in, where you have all these different factions and people, they cancel subscriptions to Netflix because they don't want to watch woke shows, and they just go to Daily Wire. And you got people that don't watch CNN or they don't watch Fox, and they don't see that family member. That, like, we're hyper factionalized, and I don't think that's any good for a government of the people for the people. Like, we all need to be in this together. We're on the same ship, and without all of us working together, it's going to sink. So that would be one of the big things I shoot for, is working with the Federal Communications Commission and things like that to sort of. There was like what was it called? The fairness doctrine that we used to have, and it would make every news outlet have to present opposing views of each issue. Eventually, they got rid of it, and the FCC said, you should, if you guys want to have something like this, have Congress pass it and make it law, rather than having this 5 board member commission sort of ensuring this. And it got struck down. But the president could bring it back. Like, he could appoint commissioners that would be willing to uphold a fairness doctrine or something like it. And or you could have Congress pass something like that, to where all the major news outlets have to ensure that they offer balanced coverage of each side, basically. Something like that, I think, would be important. Now, people that oppose it say, well, you're sort of getting into people's freedom of speech and freedom of enterprise, like sort of regulating how businesses do business. But we have a ton of stuff that's like that already. So we're just picking and choosing when we use that argument. I think.
Yeah. Do you have an example?
Yeah.
Do you have an example of something that's like that already?
Right.
Do you have an example of, like, hey, we're already picking and choosing this freedom of enterprise?
Yeah. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. It started. It basically forced businesses to say, hey, you can't just discriminate against people on certain aspects. Even though a business should have every right to conduct business whichever way they want. But when it has sort of a drawback to that, so for example, say some business didn't want to hire people of a certain religion or race. Well, on one side, you'll have like the super libertarians, I guess, that say, like, leave businesses alone, let people do whatever they want to do. If you don't like it, just go somewhere else. And on the other side, you're like, hey, that's completely discriminatory, which I would agree with. Like, there's instances where we allow the government to sort of infringe or come in and regulate when we see it necessary. And I think if it does more for the public good than it doesn't, then it's probably worth fighting for. And I think something like the fairness doctrine, or fighting for neutrality in some way, I think that would be an interesting, approach to sort of calming these hyper-partisan waters, if you will.
I like that. And the reason I ask is because one of my Twitter follows that I have is Based Politics. It's Brad and Hannah, and I'm forgetting both their last names, but it's hard to describe exactly. I'd say they're libertarian, and they actually strongly disagree with one of my opinions, and I respect them, and I like what they have to say a lot. So I'm anti-TikTok. I think that it's something we should ban in this country. And for that reason, I don't have TikTok, because I don't want to be a hypocrite. And I have friends that tell me all the time with this podcast and getting content out, it's like, dude, just get TikTok. I'm like, I can't, like, I know I'm a hypocrite in some sense that I don't know about, but I would know about that one. And I just can't get myself to do it. But those two, Brad and Hannah, they're very free speech. They're very pro free speech. And in my mind, it's like, it's not infringing on free speech. And we have examples otherwise of, like, the Civil Rights Act. This is why I asked, is that it's like, it popped in my head. It's like, I didn't have a good example in my mind, but I was like, this, in my mind, no, it's not. Like, we do this all the time with businesses, where we step in and say, hey, this is going to be a harm for the public. And I think this is harming the public, and at least it has a great potential to. And I was just curious because of that I feel like there had to be other examples out there, and there's nothing was coming to mind. So he's kind of gave me a bullet in the chamber for an argument for me there, because
Well,
there is
and
that.
yeah, and there's probably more specifics, but I would have to go back and look at my notes because this is stuff that I've been studying and looking into. But of course, with like when you get into like specific like U.S. code, laws and things like that, it's hard to remember off the top of my head certain instances. But there's definitely plenty. I mean, you can just think of what we were doing, during COVID and the stuff that we were, putting businesses through to adhere to. Like, it's not new. We do stuff all the time to sort of, rise to the occasion and meet some need or fix some problem that's coming along. So, yeah, I would focus a lot of time if I were president on trying to find ways to sort of calm the waters, make things neutral, and just do do the work of the government rather than running a reality TV show. Because I think that's a lot of what it's become is a spectacle.
I completely
And
agree.
it should be so mundane and boring that the government's so good at doing its job that we're focusing on stuff that matters the most anyways. Not to say that, politics and government doesn't matter, because it absolutely does. But the role of it has expanded and just evolved so much that they have so much, control, and they have so much of our attention that it's consuming all things. It's consuming our art and our media and everything. And it's created this toxic environment, unfortunately. And I just think we need more adults in the room that are doing it the right way, saying, hey, I'm here, I'm willing to compromise. Let's find the best solution to fix said problem, and let's go. And for example, a big issue like right now that I've noticed, like you can take like a hot topic, like let's say abortion, and where you have both sides of the argument that they just can't seem to come to any middle ground. And I think the issue with that is that we're trying to find an impossible solution because it's not dealing with the root problem in the first place. And that is why are we having women, in a lot of cases, young women that are pregnant when they don't want to be or they're not ready to be? And for example, like, because on the side of this argument, for example, you have, one side that's like, hey, that's killing a baby. On the other side, it's like, hey, that's the woman's, it's her body, it's her right. Like, that's none of our business. With both of those sides, I can actually see from their point of view what they're saying. I'm like, no, I totally get it.
Same.
Good argument
Yeah.
there. So why is it that it like turns into this discussion where like it really matters about the specifics of the scenario, and that's how you can sort of develop your own opinion? I think that's because there really is not a right answer, because it's not dealing with the root problem that created that problem in the first place. And why are there young women that they get pregnant and they can't afford it, and they don't have their partner there to support them in that time? Just things like that. And I think a lot of our issues is that we think it's either this or that, but really it's not that. We're not dealing with the root cause.
In this case, actually, this is one of my, I guess, maybe arrogant. One of my more arrogant thoughts, I suppose, if that's the correct word, is about abortion. I don't believe I've said this out loud. I'll say it again. I think I'm the only one I've ever talked to that's actually had this conversation correctly. I like the way that you're taking it with, hey, what's the root cause? And I'd love to talk about that in a second. But in my mind, it's the ultimate example of the hypocrisy of both sides.
Yes.
It's just crazy to me because it's so. My bias is I am pro-choice. Some might say radically pro-choice. However, when I talk about this with my liberal, I don't think they deserve to be called liberal, my progressive friends, they get upset with me. It's one of the times where like they get truly upset with me, pissed off because I don't agree with their opinions of it. They're false opinions according to modern science of what is happening in this whole scenario. So, for example, like it is a baby. I mean, maybe not a baby, but it is a human life. That's not my opinion. University of Chicago study, 96% of biologists agree that it's a human life at conception, and there's plenty of other studies like that too. So it's a human life, baby, not baby, whatever. That one I'm not as a stickler about. But when I say that, I've had friends be very upset with me, and it's the party that upholds science. But then on the other side, it's very the conservative Republican Party is the religious party of this country, and I'm not religious at all. However, I've read not all of, but I've read chunks of the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, and I try to be educated about those things. And in Genesis 2:1, human life begins at first breath. That is when a human life begins, is that first breath, if you are a believer in Judeo-Christian values. And they seem to throw that out the window completely for this one example. And
Yeah.
so there's immediate hypocrisy on both sides. And it's with everyone I've ever talked to on both sides. They just both will throw whatever side they're on, they'll throw that fact out the window. And it
Right.
just immediately doesn't matter. And then on top of that, for me, it's when I'm arguing with someone who's pro-life and or debating with someone who's pro-life and I am pro-choice. In my mind, it's okay. Here's what's happening. There is a human life, and then there's an adult woman. Whose right trumps whose? The woman's right to bodily autonomy or the unborn's right to life? So one of
Right.
those are going to have to trump another because they can't coexist in this moment, and that's a conundrum. Like that's a real issue.
Well, think about the
So
death penalty or self-defense. In those instances, we have a scenario to where we accepted or generally accept that it's okay to take a life because of A or B. You know what I mean? So, like
that's a
self-defense,
great example.
they're trying to take your life. Well, a lot of people believe, and even a lot of people on the religious right think you should be able to defend yourself, even if it means having to kill another person. Or a lot of them also strongly believe in the death penalty. And for me, I actually, even though I do sort of lean on the right, I have a difficulty with both of those scenarios. Obviously, with self defense, I think that's pretty straightforward. I can see why people believe, like, hey, if in order to defend my life, I have to take the life of that person, I'm not going to argue against that. I can clearly see. But with the death penalty, I actually do have a tough time justifying because, like, who am I to say whether this person should live or die, no matter what they did do? Me killing them, doesn't that just make me just like them? If they killed a person and I'm killing them to prove a lesson, what lesson did I really, teach anyone?
No, I understand what you're saying. That's one of those. That's actually one of those things where the left and right flip flop too.
Right.
Is the
And it's
death penalty?
interesting.
It's another one of those things. It's really
Yeah,
interesting, and I like
it
those
is.
topics a lot. I like those
To me,
topics a lot because it's why do we think this way?
right.
There's whole tribes of people that are contradicting themselves. It is interesting, but to continue on the abortion one real quick,
Yeah.
where my mind goes in this, and and I like the point you just brought up as well. I'll add Tony to another person that has this conversation. Truthfully, not just Troy anymore, but
Yeah.
where my mind goes is okay, if you're going to be a pro-life person and you're going to say the right to life trumps the right to bodily autonomy, then don't we have to take away the rights of the dead? Because right now the dead have bodily autonomy rights, and no, it's not one for one, but you are killing life by
Yeah.
allowing this bodily autonomy of a dead person. You're killing life, and you're saying a dead person has more rights to bodily autonomy than a woman does under our, if that's what you believe. That is exactly what you're saying. So in my mind, if that is your true opinion and your true morals, well, okay, the first thing we need to do is take the right to bodily autonomy away from the dead, because that is, again, it's not one for one, which is an argument I'll hear. However, it's definitely killing people. It's without a
Yeah.
doubt it's leading to death. And that's where I'm like, if you are truly pro-life, then that's something we need to do, and then I'll have the discussion again. I like the example that you bring up, and with the death penalties, it's a great analogy for this as well. But it's those type of topics, the death penalty, abortion, those type of topics where it's like the hypocrisy of both sides come out. Those ones really do draw me because it's just in my mind there's so much groupthink going on, and it just that's where the echo chambers really are speaking the loudest, are in
Right.
those type of topics where the ideology kind of breaks down in
Yeah.
a sense.
And I think the reason why when we really get into the nuts and bolts of these discussions, just like we did, where we talk about certain facets of it, we're like, wow, that's interesting. I never, considered that or used that to sort of explore the morality of it. I think it brings us back to it's because we're trying to solve problems with the same level of thinking that created them in the first place, to sort of generalize a old school Einstein quote. And I think that's true. Like we're trying to solve problems as if we were God, and we're not. I think what would really aid this issue for abortion, for example, is if we could get medicine and or technology to a point to where we could prevent someone from ever having to get into a situation where they have an unwanted pregnancy. And I mean, we're pretty close. I mean, you got Plan B and different birth control forms out there, but just getting it, wider access to it, more education on it, broader discussion on it, things like that. And also, I think another important thing is just creating sort of a society that puts value on, I don't know, just engaging in sort of that stuff responsibly and doing it, in a
Mm.
in a responsible manner, so that when you're doing it, you're comfortable and there's just more intent behind it. And so basically, I guess, just trying to find ways that create it from becoming a problem in the first place, so that it's really so rare that it's not a hot political discussion anymore, because it's really not happening, and we need to get to that. I mean, I think we're
That makes
slowly
a lot of
getting there,
sense.
but you know what I mean? Like, no matter what, we're still ending at this sort of fork in the road where, like, it's like, okay, well, what's the scenario? Like, what's her background? Was she raped, or was she just with a guy that sort of, left her and never talked to her again? Like, with all these debates, or like they bring up a certain scenario that happened in some anecdotal case. And of course, like, when you do that, it's impossible to come up with an answer that answers every single scenario, no matter which side you're on. And to me, that's because it's not dealing with the actual problem that's sort of creating those scenarios in the first place. I mean, I think
So
that
when you say that,
a lot of
what
topics.
we could go down this one for abortion for a long time, because I think when you say that it's not going to the direct issue, there would be the people on the right who would say, well, yeah, we just need more celibacy and we need more XYZ. And the people on the left would go, well, no, we just need free birth control. Everyone should have free birth control. And, we keep going down we could keep going down parts of division. But the way that you are going about it, I don't hear people talk about it in that sense, to talk about this
I agree.
debate in that sense. And it is
I hear it.
ever. I think that is
Yeah.
the right way to go about it. Instead, actually, that's definitely something I've learned here today, is that I still have my opinion of it, but that's definitely one of the things I have to say now going forward too, is that, hey, I talked to Tony at Stately News, and he brought up a good point of, we're not attacking the core issue here,
And with
which
that,
is, yeah,
some people will say, "Oh, well, that's just a cop out." And I mean, I disagree, but I can sympathize with why they say that, because a lot of times we'll see politicians sort of do that, and then they fail to talk about the other stuff that would help that core problem. And I think you would have to talk about something like, birth control being widely available and even free, so that people can take it and prevent this from becoming a problem. And you have some people on the more extreme right that are like, they totally believe that anytime you engage in intercourse, this is a more extreme example, but they think anytime that you engage in intercourse, it should be to have a kid, and that's it. Of course, not everyone's going to live according to that. So I think there has to be a sense of practicality and moderation used in that discussion. But I think we can get to a point, like I said, to where the the need for an abortion is way more rare than it is right now. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I'm sure there's several, a few million a year or something like that, maybe more. I'm
I
not sure.
I would assume, I don't know either. The
Yeah,
That would be the best case scenario. The discussion would still never go away in that case,
right,
because there's still always going to be those examples. However, it would be less of an issue, and if it's less of an issue, if it's only 10,000 versus maybe it's a million right now, I don't know. All of a sudden, there's maybe more pressing things that we want to talk about, and but maybe not. So, as an example, one of the things that is near and dear to my heart, which kind of, to bring parts of this conversation together and take it a completely different direction, is Israel Palestine issue. It's May 2021. There was a flare up, and I just saw an incredible, insane amount of anti Semitism and things that I knew were false going around on the internet. And no one was saying it. Many people weren't saying anything, only Jews. And then the progressive Jews were saying horrible, even in defense of anti-Semitism and Jews. It wasn't. It was at most, include Jews in your activism, and it's just like, that was it. And it's like, hey, you're not attacking the issue at all. And
right,
it brought me down this path of, I'm going to learn about this. I'm going to know what I'm talking about. I'm going to mentally prepare myself to learn that, hey, my people are probably doing some fucked up things, and I'm going to go down this route. I'm going to read books on both sides, and I'm going to follow on Twitter. So actually, when I expanded my Twitter following, or who I was following,
right.
into journalists, and it's where I found, like, oh, these journalists that have 1,000 to 10,000 followers in Israel and Palestine, and like, these are where I can get news, and fast news, and that, and I'm
Yeah,
gonna understand, hey, this person isn't talking about X and this person isn't talking about Y, and I went down this whole rabbit hole, and it's something I still stay up to date on today. But it really does bring things together. Which what I was just saying is, maybe we could talk about more pressing issues. However, maybe not. There's do seem to be issues which we just really go full sports mode. We go full tribal mode on, and we just want to talk about it no matter what. Abortion might be one of those. And my point of bringing this up is that what I have learned is that Israel Palestine is clearly one of those. It's not the biggest human rights issue. It's not even the biggest land issue. What's the exact word I'm looking for here? Land
Geopolitical.
dispute. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Land dispute. Land dispute. So like they're everywhere. I've found hundreds of them actually. There's in Pakistan and Western Sahara, Morocco. It's not even the biggest human rights thing with Arabs. Or with if you look in Syria, parts of Lebanon, the Uyghur Muslims in China,
Yeah.
and there's just all of these topics. I'm like, at some point, it's like, dude, why are they so focused on Jews? Like, why is the world so? It's one of those things that I could go down a rabbit hole of this as well, but it made me think of that. Like maybe abortion just is one of those topics we just like to play sports with, because Israel Palestine has become one of those topics that we just like to play sports with. We like to choose a side and just rah your side's bad. So I don't know. There is something to specific issues that does just last.
And I think there's something to that. And I'll start with this because I think it helps sort of set the stage. There's a quote from the Federalist Papers, number 51, which is written by James Madison, one of our founders. And he says something to the effect of, "What is government but the greatest of all reflections of human nature?" And I think in that, he talks about a foundational idea that's always stuck with me, and that is our institutions, our politics, our society is made up of us. And so as a result, both our best and our worst qualities get reflected in those things. And with these discussions like this, you have interest groups that they have to compete in these mediums, and they have to use these issues to gain and wield support, to raise money and to enact legislation and to get people elected or not get people elected. So they take these hot topic issues and they create sort of a platform based on it. And so that's why you'll hear a lot of people on the left or right. They sort of just walk in line and have they use the same lines and the same rhetoric when it comes to certain issues. We saw that on like the war in Ukraine, for example, to where that became where you had, each side, one for it, one against it, and they have the reasonings why. You see that with climate change, for example. And interesting enough, if you do the research, you'll find that usually each side of these arguments will have interest groups that fund their campaigns that fall on the benefit of one of each side. So the oil companies on one and the wind and solar on the other, for example. And I think in a lot of instances that carries over to a lot of these topics. And so with like Israel and Palestine, I can't say for sure, because that's something outside of my realm, but it is something I want to look more into, is sort of our foreign policy issues and stuff like that. And I think you might find a similar thing where certain interest groups and countries and stuff fund each side of that argument, and that's a reason why they have this platform. And it's their job to sort of communicate those ideas and influence the base to sort of espouse those ideas and fall in line and support it. And so it's this perpetual cycle of trying to create support for ideas and movements and to move those things along to gain power, to make money, or whatever the goal is. And so you see all of that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. In the Israel Palestine portion specifically, there's a book called Woke Army, which I'm gonna mess up her name. I feel horrible about it, but Woke Army is a good book. She was a journalist, Muslim journalist, and when she went to go report in the Middle East, her partner got killed, and she came back home and she was fighting for equal rights within her mosque, and she just kept running to issue after issue, and she kind of found how there was this kind of alliance between the Middle Eastern conservative world, but it's majority of the Middle Eastern world holds these views, and they started forming this weird alliance and army with the progressives of the left. And there's a lot of interest groups in there. It was a really good read, and it touched on Israel and anti-Semitism as really just one of those, like the reason it became so big is because it's just one of those outlets of hey, we can use this to gain support and to gather attention. And the Jew isn't one of your topics. And I should probably talk about this with I don't know, a Jewish journalist guest that I have on at some point, but something I have discovered is that it is a topic of interest for the world, and it's a scapegoat for the world, and it's a really good way to just repeat lines. And you see AOC do this. Someone I'd
Yeah.
love to talk to, actually, if I ever got the opportunity, and I'd want to talk about this specific issue, because she has a quote where she says it's like you're not even allowed to mention the word Palestine. You're not even allowed to talk about that word or that place. And then she does an interview where they ask her one question about it, and she immediately says, I'm not the expert on this issue. So she's just caught like, oh, you're just saying lines. You don't really know what you're talking about. And it's not just that topic. That's one that's near and dear to my heart. But it's not just that topic. I've seen it once I saw that. And that particular example, I was just
Yeah.
like, whoa, okay. And then I started seeing it in the climate change debates. And
Yeah.
I started seeing it in all these different aspects. It's like, oh, you're just saying this line you've been taught to say, that you've been taught to chirp like a bird. And it is, yeah, it's interesting. My mind always goes back to, how do we change these incentive systems? How do we do that? How can we go about getting this right? And in my mind, it is the incentives, because we're human beings. And I think that's one of the things that capitalism got right over socialism. I'm really into econ as well. And
Yeah.
I've
Same
read
here.
I read like some of the bigger guys. So like Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, with the Invisible Hand, really stuck with me. Theodore Schultz and Karl Marx and those socialist guys, and the big ones of recent times, quote unquote, of Milton Friedman and Maynard Keynes. I read all those guys, and like in my mind, it's like what capitalism got right is that it understands the incentives of humans. Like it understands like, okay, these creatures are this way. Yeah, these
Yeah.
creatures are this way, and you're not going to change that. So we need to find a system that makes it work within it. That's what my mind always goes back to, is how do we change the incentives? That's how we make things better, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more.
So, all right, talking about that, wow, we have actually, I haven't even checked the time until now. We have gone hour 20. I could
Yeah.
go another hour 20. It's talk about different issues and everything, and maybe things that are near and dear to your heart, and all of that good stuff. But this is a good time to take a breath. Yeah. So, is there anything that I haven't touched on? Like, oh, I wish he asked about XYZ yet?
No, I mean, I think we've been going at a decent pace. We've talked about a lot of stuff that I figured we would, and I'm enjoying it. So I love talking about this.
Yeah, me
It's
too.
super.
This is like my favorite conversations to have. I'm really excited I got to talk about this. When I started the podcast, again, it was a vending machine thing. I have two older brothers who are like entrepreneurs, completely business minded. Funny enough, the last one of the reels I posted, my oldest brother, corporate real estate guy, it was just
Yeah.
about money. It was like about the stock market. And he's like, this is the best one yet. And I was like, this is the first money one. Like, this is the first one to talk about, just business. And it's like, I think
Yeah.
that's why I'm so interested in it. And that's where, like, obviously my brothers and my parents, they shaped who I am, obviously. And
Right.
the podcast started very businessy. Vending machine podcast, into outside the box investing, because I got really into AMC. Oh, I'd actually love to talk to you about that in a second. But I got really into AMC, and that's what got me on Twitter. And so I started talking to those people, and it eventually turned into the good of Twitter. It just really aligns with who I am. I think my main characteristic is my empathy, and I'm just really am a people person. I love hearing people's stories. Like, definitely my dream would be to talk to amazing, cool people like yourself, and hopefully get paid to do it one day. But for now, I other than that paid part, I really am living the dream. I get to talk to so many cool founders like you, and people just trying to do good in the world. And so very glad that it ended up being the good of Twitter that brought me here. And I get to have these conversations, political conversations, and I just love them. I have them all the time, and I can wear my family out. So I can come on here and hopefully not wear you out with them,
Yeah. I love it, and I totally see it. So, man, I think what you're doing is very necessary. It's amazing. I think you're naturally good at it. You're curious. You're attentive, and the empathy thing I think is important. And I think I don't know. I see a lot of parallels to what you see with like Lex Friedman, and so I think it's just a matter of time before this blows up, dude. So
I
I'm
appreciate you. I
excited
hope
for you.
so.
So
I appreciate it.
I see it. So it's just a matter of time. So
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Speaking of Lex Friedman, there are questions I ask at the end.
Yeah.
Basically, completely ripped him from that guy. I like him a lot. Yeah, I respect that guy a lot. I like what he's doing.
I do too. So
Yeah. So on some of those questions that I like to ask, is there a message a book maybe that you would recommend, or a message that you love that you'd want to share with whoever it is that's listening, the followers and subscribers of Stately News, or anyone that you can go tell, hey, go check out hour 1 minute 22 and go listen to this?
Whew, that's tough. Well, I mean, I guess the big thing, there's been a big theme that's sort of been in my mind over the last year or so, and that is everybody sort of has this whisper in their ear telling them that there's something that they should be doing. There's something they're meant to do. And I think everyone, they know exactly what I'm talking about. For some people, it's shouting, but for some people, it's this steady, just sort of perpetual whisper in your ear. And a lot of people will put it off. And for me, Stately News was that for a while. And finally, I don't know, I built up the courage and I went for it. And it started off as an idea that did not exist. There was no website, there was no app, there were no articles to read. No one was reading them. And back in October, I finally launched it. I got a team of intern reporters to hop on and help write stories. And I started busting out stories. And next thing you know, we're in May, 6 months later. And like I've said, we're averaging 5,000 readers a month right now after the month of April. So it started off as something that did not exist into something that now 5,000 people are reading. It would not have happened if I didn't go for it. And so if you see something that you're passionate about or talented at, just start. It doesn't have to be perfect at the beginning, but you just go for it. And that's been a big theme for me lately. And so, yeah, whoever's watching this and needs some encouragement to start something that, they've been going back and forth on, just go for it, because the world needs you. You may not believe it, but you have something unique and special about you that is necessary. And the world, it needs it. It needs you to put it out there. So
That's a beautiful message. I love that message. All right. Any book recommendations? Any paradigm shifters for you?
The Federalist Papers for me is a big one. You read a lot of the ideas and discussions that the founders were having if you're super into politics. If not, there's a book, I can't remember the author, but The Culture Code. And it just examines how just well-ran organizations build culture and create infrastructure to just dominate, to do business well, to do politics well, or whatever it is you're interested in. I think understanding culture and relationships is very important. So The Culture Code, that's a good one. Definitely check that out. I'm trying to think of maybe like a business or economics. Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. That's like a super dense book, but it's a lot of good stuff. I mean, Sowell's a legend. He's an encyclopedia of knowledge. So that's another good one.
Awesome. I've read that one. The other ones, I can't believe I've never read the Federalist Papers. I should definitely do that.
Yeah,
I'm building a list of books to read. It was 50 books at the start, and I think it's getting 80 to 90 now. I wanted to read 50 this year.
Nice.
I've chosen some big books, and I don't think I'm going to hit 50 anymore, but always trying to build the knowledge. So that question is very much for me. Listeners too, I hope they take it and read it, but I'm honestly just trying to build my library. And those are
definitely after. I'll give you some more recommendations after for sure.
Oh, I appreciate that. Have you ever read Robert Greene?
48 Laws of Power, I've dabbled in. I haven't finished it though, but I need to. But I'm fascinated with all of the stuff. Him and Ryan Holiday, I'm a big fan of as well.
Oh, Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
Okay, it's another one. So Robert Greene, I'm so fascinated with the way he writes, how he uses historical stories and giving counterexamples. It's like how he writes it fascinates me. I did 48 Laws of Power twice.
Wow.
And I'm through most of his books. It really does grab me. I like that one. I like that one a lot, and it sounds like something you might be interested in because we seem to overline our interests quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I was curious. And then I got one more question for you. Oh, yeah.
Ryan Holiday's like his protege, so they actually work together a lot and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of influence on Ryan's writing. He does like a lot of Stoic stuff, which is something I'm trying to get into. I actually just got the book Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, so he does a lot of stuff in that space, just like self-help, improvement, stoicism, things like that.
Super cool. Yeah, one of my best friends, very into philosophy, and he recommended that book to me like 40 times before I finally picked it up, and I was like,
yeah,
I should have picked this up earlier.
Yeah,
it's one that I think it's one that everyone should read. Meditations I think it should be like required school reading. That's actually, if I was president, to backtrack an hour here, if I was president, it's one of the things that I would try and push through a lot is I'd want to redo our school curriculum.
Oh, for sure.
Specifically I have a handful of specifics, but one of the specifics would be what we are required to read. I think meditations, especially with the crisis of children that we're having, the mental health crisis. I think meditations needs to be something that's a mandatory reading in school. I think it would literally save lives. I know a handful of people that unfortunately committed suicide as teenagers, both when I was a teenager and now in my 20s. It's a story you hear, and it's not going away. There's a book, The Coddling of the American Mind, that touches on the statistics that I liked a lot, and in that book is just like, once I read it, and I read it at 26. I read it this year at 26, and I was like, God, I wish I read this when I was 14 and 15. It's like, I wish it was just one of those things that you definitely should read. And another book that I don't know, you might have some interest in it. I really got interested in China and China's history.
Yeah.
So I started with like some like just broad historical books. Red Flags was a good one. It touched on China's recent history. It's like the last 150 years, and then up to now, what's happening in modern day China. And a book that I picked up kind of after that broad reading of it, and I got really interested in Mao's time. So Mao won the Civil War in 1949, and by 1952, they owned like half the farmland. It was all government, and like just massive overhauls in 3 years.
Yeah.
And there was a book during that time. Well, there was a book about that time, a true story called Born Red. It was a student's experience going to school and what happened in his school during this time, and you just see the worst of humanity come out, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting, and it's real life Lord of the Flies. So we read Lord of the Flies to learn the lessons of, you know, kind of like, hey, we're savages, and we're gonna go towards a system of governance. And I'm not saying this book will completely replace that, but it goes very well with it. And not only that, it's a real story, it's a true story, and you see what can happen. You see what could potentially happen if the woke left, the radical left, won this culture war, and how whatever might happen. I'm an optimist. I don't think it's happening. I think we're gonna go towards the center, as we talked about in the beginning. But
Yeah.
you see a real life example of, hey, the scary things we see on college campuses that happen, especially as a Jew. There's a lot of that stuff does scare me, that I see in Michigan and Berkeley and Duke, and there's a lot of scary things happening there. Like, this
Yeah.
could happen. Like, this could happen on a campus. Yeah.
There's a lot of
So
Marxist parallels and undertones to it, and people worry about that. And I think there's something to be said. So yeah, it's interesting. And I know, like, when I was doing some reading and research into like the Cultural Revolution, there's striking similarities, and I think it just goes back to the fact that humans, we have tendencies to be tribal. I mean, in Plato's work, Politics, he refers to humans as political animals, and I think he's exactly right. We have this tendency to be tribal and to create political systems and to create societies. Like, that stuff's not going away. So we have to find a way to sort of bring out the best in our nature while working to mitigate, the worst aspects of us. And I think discussing these ideas like this, having an open mind, trying to put yourself in other people's shoes, those are very important qualities. And that's classic. That's like classic liberalism, liberal in the sense that what it used to mean, and I think those are
it's
important American foundational ideas.
absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And the topic of America, like, I, I do fucking love this country, man. Like, what this country stands for and what the founders did, and there's so much good here. I think that's why. I think part of the reason, if you listen to me enough, you'll realize I definitely tend to shit on the left more than I shit on the right. But I think part of it is that I came from the left on my journey towards the
Right.
center.
Yeah.
I would say I'm more of a liberal than I am anything else in the classical sense. Like you said at the beginning, I'm more of a liberal than anything else.
Yeah.
So it bothers me seeing it from that side.
I'm very much the same way, and I've had a similar experience. When I was younger, beginning college, early college, I was definitely more of a lefty. And as I continued to grow up, develop, become a father, become a husband, build businesses, it's just opened up my worldview more into where I've considered things. And if I'm being completely honest, I think if you're really trying to find the most optimal path forward, I don't think the left or right has the complete right answer, if I'm being honest with you. And I
Completely
think
agree.
majority of Americans believe that as well. And that's why they're sort of just disenchanted with what's going on. I mean, if you look poll after poll, our trust in our institutions and the media continues to go on a downward trend. And that's not a good thing. And we've got to get our act together and change that. And yeah, I just think it's important to talk about it. That's the only way we're going to identify it as a problem, and then come up with a course of action to sort of correct where we're headed.
Completely agree. I think we have identified it. And I think we have come up with solutions. Now it's just going to take time. A Warren Buffett quote is, you can't get 9 women pregnant and have a baby in a month.
Yeah.
Now it's just going to take time and take people like you. And I appreciate you saying what I'm doing is important. I think what you're doing is much more important. And I think my role in all of this is to help spread it and help spread these messages. It's really like, that's kind of how I picture myself here, is like, I'm just helping spread a message the best I can. And
we all have a role to
yeah,
play. We all rely on one
yeah,
another. It's all one cohesive process, and yeah, we all have to do our part. Even people that
yeah,
don't want to build things or create content or do any of that, you can still be an active voter and discuss things with your family and your neighbors and your coworkers. Like, it's all, we like to think of like, oh, I'm just one person. I'm not going to make a difference, but you really can, and you will, whether you act or don't act. Both of those have an effect. So it's all important to consider. And I do think, while we're both obviously optimistic, but we're both sort of realists, and we realize that there's some dangerous things going on both sides. I think we need a new narrative. And one thing that's I've seen, being discussed a lot and throughout history is the issue of nationalism. And for good reason. I mean, like with Nazi Germany, you could see why nationalism could be a very bad thing. And I think what is different, though, in the United States is that we're not just a single race country like these other countries are. Anybody can be an American. And I think that's sort of the narrative we should be talking about. Anybody can come here and create a better life for themselves and their family. That is the American way. And that's something that should be available to everyone, whether you're transgender or whether you're a conservative white man or an Asian Democrat. It should not matter. This country is for everyone. Everyone can be an American, and we need a core set of foundational ideas, which I think are more or less classical liberal in the sense, which that's what the founders intended. And I think they got a lot right. Obviously, not everything perfect, but we have to sort of build on, take stock of what we got wrong throughout history, have honest discussions about those, do what we can to sort of remedy the problems caused by those things, and move forward. And we keep getting stuck on these roadblocks with these partisan battles over these discussions, and we're not moving forward. And I think we need a new narrative to bring us together, a new direction, something to aim for, a North Star, if you will, and just get after it. Because we're too stuck in all of these ideas and partisanship, and little is being done to actually change it. And so that's why I just felt so called to do something like this, to get out there and to start doing, even if it's on a small scale right now. If you just get started and do an honest job and try to do things a better way, that eventually you'll get there. And that's what we're just trying to do, is move the needle.
I think you will. I think you have the right message. You have the right work ethic, and what you've been able to do in 6 months is incredible. I hope my growth is going to be able to emulate that. And I've been doing this longer than 6 months, but I've been the YouTube, Instagram, like getting reels out, which is really how I'm going to be able to grow. I've figured out. Yeah,
And
that's
I
what I
saw
figured out.
I saw with the Dudes Fridges episode, I did want to touch on this, so I'm glad you brought it up. How you guys are both
Yeah,
talking about being in a certain situation where you're not sure what the next move is, or you have something that you think you should be doing, but you're kind of held back by it. For me, that was reels. And I don't know if you've seen them, where I do these quick videos, just breaking down the quick facts of some big story that just happened. For a long time, I didn't want to do that because I didn't want it to be about me. I still don't. I want Staley to be its own brand. But I saw sort of the growth that was taking place with YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, TikTok. Like, there's a huge hunger for that short content. And I thought,
mm-hmm.
and obviously seeing like the polls that have been coming out where people are increasingly getting their news from these platforms, I'm like, well, you know what? If I truly believe in the marketplace of ideas and offering a better way of doing news, I have to get out there and present it to people, or they're not going to know about it. And it's the best low cost way. So like, dude, Reels, I started doing Reels like last month, really. I really started doing it consistently. And I've tripled my following on Instagram. It's insane. And $0. Ads, I
0.
tried ads when I first launched. I tried ads and I got to like 400 followers, but it's not cheap. Like, the return on investment, there's no comparison, in my opinion, when it came to producing Reels and trying to run ads. So creating that content is the way to go, and you just got to go.
Yeah. Just gotta keep going every day. Content, as my buddy Dylan Dudeford just told me, it's just content, content, content.
Yeah.
And he hit it hard. And he has 20,000 followers now, and
That's,
it really has been incredible being able to like go on this journey with a friend like that who's done
yeah.
this. And he's 50 feet up the mountain, 100 feet up the mountain. When I'm looking down at the bottom, it's like, oh, yeah, he did that. I can go do this. And it's a little different. What you and I are doing, I'd say, is I relate more to what you are doing than what he's doing in a meme account. But at the end of the day, we are trying to expand our reach. And his goal is really just to have fun and try and spread laughter and joy, and that you escape,
Yeah.
everything else, and through a funny concept of what's
Yeah.
in your fridge.
It's
And,
absolutely
it's
necessary.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. It's one of the parts of good at Twitter are is the memes. I think the memes. I really like that Elon Musk interacts with meme people. I think it's like a super important part of culture.
Yes.
As I mentioned in that episode, actually, the selfish gene by Darwin. I'm also an evolution nerd, and I'm really excited to have the a big evolutions talks, big podcast of Rick Costa. I gotta figure out his last name at some point. I've already read it. He's got Evolution Talks, a really big podcast, Evolution, and I'm excited to talk to him about it. But there's a book he mentions, and other books I've mentioned, called The Selfish Gene by Darwin. And it mentions mnemonics, a study of memes, and how it's a unit of culture. And I really liked that quote. And I
Yeah.
think what we're all trying to do are just move units of culture. We're trying to
Yeah.
spread units of culture. And when you interact with that enough, as you were saying before, all the role play. And when enough people are in that game of trying to consume, I mean, we're always consuming units of culture, whether we know it or not. We're trying to consume, filter, and pass forward those units of culture. Really special things can happen.
Exactly.
So, on that note, I'll ask you one more question and I'll let you go. It's my last question for all your episodes. So you might know it's coming, but if, in your opinion, what is the meaning of life?
It's love. I think it's love. And that's a deep and long, all-encompassing conversation. But yeah, I think in the most basic sense, I think it is love. I think I do come from a background where I was raised, Christian. That definitely forms my beliefs. But when I approach topics like this, I actually talk as if I'm not religious. And I think more or less all religions are really talking about the same thing at the foundational level. And I think that basically, I think it's very possible that all of this, you, I, this computer, these ideas, everything is all just small parts of the same whole, basically the universe experiencing itself. And I think in that is a beautiful idea, because if you think about it, you no longer have to have that debate of like, why would God allow that young child to get cancer and die, for example? Well, that's because that child is also God. Why would you let that man walk into that store and shoot those people? It's terrible. Why would God just sit back and let that happen? Well, I think the only way it would all make sense is if that was God as well. Small parts of the same whole. And that's a huge like idea to tackle and would take a whole other hour to discuss. But basically, I think it all leads us back to love. And the only way to understand the power of love is to also understand the things that are opposite of that, the pain and just the terrible, darkness that this world is capable of, facilitating. And I think, yeah, I just think trying to find the light in the abyss is the best you can do. And to sort of, me in my life, I've had a rough childhood, so I've always just tried to take my pain and create something beautiful from that. So rather than letting my circumstances define who I am, I take that pain and try to create something good out of it. So rather than just trying to get back at someone, no, just take it on the chin and try to prove them wrong and say, look, you were wrong about me. And not only did I prove you wrong, but I went and I did something good with it. And I think all of that for me comes from love. So yeah, that's my answer.
That's an amazing answer. That is an amazing answer. I
Yeah.
Not to be punny, I love the answer.
Yeah.
I actually, I'm not religious,
Yeah. Well,
and
I'm actually, it's tough. I'm not either. Like, I don't claim to be any one religion right now. I'm kind of homeless, if you will, but I do take a lot from them. And Christianity has been a big influence on
yes,
me. But I do think that there is, I don't know, I just think there's something that created all of this. I'm not convinced any of us have the single one answer that really describes it in its entirety, basically. So
I completely agree. But so, yeah, what I was gonna say is that I used to be, I started reading the Bible at like 12, and I quickly became an atheist. So I was reading the stuff, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And I've learned to like take the lessons and try and find lessons, and read it more than an adult would. But what I would say I believe in now is that I believe in the universe. If someone asks me if I believe in God, I tell them I believe in the universe, and that we're all a part of this, and that us as human beings, we're skin cells. We're born and die in a second, and the universe it's experiencing itself. I've never put it in that way. I've never thought of it in that way. I have said we are the universe's way of becoming to know itself as human beings. We're discovering the universe, and that's what we're doing. And we are the universe. We're all the same stardust at the end of the day. And I love that. I've never thought about it in that way that you just put it, but I I love that. That's a very beautiful answer, man.
I
I'd love to
appreciate it.
talk more about that and any news that comes up in the future.
Definitely.
I'd love to have you back on and make this a relationship that we continue to grow together. And I'll definitely I have a new news source for sure, and I'm
Yeah.
excited. I'm excited to watch the growth, and I'll definitely be having you back on in the future if you want to come back on.
Dude, definitely. So I've got a new podcast I can watch. So I'm looking forward to
Hell
it.
yeah, I appreciate it, sir. And you said you were out of Miami, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually from St. Pete, Tampa area, but I moved down here in Miami. My wife's Cuban. So she's from here, and I moved down about 6 years ago.
Oh, so
So
actually, I have a funny story. I thought I was Cuban for 18 years of my life. First 18 years of my
what?
life, I thought I was a fourth Cuban. I'll actually
Wow.
go real quick after this, but my grandma fled here from Cuba, and she's very, very dark. So I have a darker complexion,
Yeah.
and it comes from her. And she's very dark. Spanish was her first language. She fled Cuba when she's like 7 on a boat. I did my projects of like heritage projects on Cuba a lot of the time. It was either Cuba or Israel, and then at 18 years old, I'm having a family discussion, and I find out we're not Cuban, that her parents fled there from Poland, and she was actually even conceived in Poland. And I was like, wait, so she's just an Ashkenazi Jew like the rest of
Right.
us? And like, yeah, you didn't know that? I was like, you helped me with my projects when I was a kid. You knew I thought I was. I was mind blown. I was absolutely mind blown. So like, where did
Wow.
so she's also Ashkenazi, and I need to do a DNA test and figure out where all I'm from.
Yeah.
but
You should.
but yeah, I know a good amount about Cuba because I used to study it because I used to think I was Cuban. So anywho, there's a funny little story there. But I've had a couple of podcasts with people down in Miami, and I did my first in person one here in Austin, Texas. I'm a traveler. I'm a digital nomad, so I would love to spend some time down in Miami. And what I'll probably do now is try and get you on the schedule and a couple other people I've talked to on the schedule and find a studio out there and make it a work trip. So we should get one in person at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be sick.
Awesome, awesome. All right, Tony, thank you for your time. I'll let you
Yeah.
go, and until next time, keep crushing it, keep informing the people and inspiring people. And until then, much love, sir.
Yeah. Much love. Thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.